So, good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to the San Francisco Center for Spiritual Living, and thank you for making this your place of residence and consciousness right now. I mean, there's lots of different things we could be doing today, but there's nothing that we could be doing that's exactly like what you're doing right now. Now, there's many places where you could be doing something like this, but what you have elected to do by coming here today was to add the consciousness that you are to the broth, to the bouillabaisse, to the Holy Spirit's unleashing of itself into the world. What I mean by that is your consciousness makes a difference, and where you are with your consciousness makes a difference in that place. That doesn't mean that if you're not someplace that consciousness isn't working. But when you decide that I'm going to be in a particular place at a particular time, there's a particular energy that you resonate that shows up in that place that has a direct influence on what's going on in that place. Are you with me on this so far? You understand what I'm saying? Yes? So we always want to remember that your consciousness makes a difference. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to do our quote together because everybody knows it by now, right? I've only been saying it for 2 years, at least. So never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed individuals can make a difference in the world. Indeed, that's all that ever has. Beautiful. Margaret Mead's words echo and resound throughout all of consciousness, that you never doubt that your consciousness makes a difference. Never doubt that who you are makes a difference. And to say never doubt means always remember. Always remember that God's in charge. Back in the old church that I was raised in, there used to be a song, which I don't remember the whole thing. Good for you guys. But I remember there was this one line that says, "Wherever you walk, you are not walking alone. Remember, God is still on the throne." And that's just a thing they take with them, and that you always remember God's on the throne. No matter what's happening in your life, no matter what's going on, there's a power that's greater than the circumstance. There's a power that's greater than the situation. There's a power that's greater than your opinion about what's going on. Thank God for that. So that means we can let go of whatever we think is going on in the moment and remember that God is still on the throne. What does God is still on the throne mean? Somebody in here wants to tell me this, because I just got stopped and said, ask the question. What does God is still on the throne mean? Somebody.
Still in charge.
Still in charge. Anybody else?
God and I are one.
God and I are one. Absolutely, yes?
God is all there is.
God is all there is, okay?
Everything's all right.
Everything's all right. Not gonna be all right. Like, is everything gonna? No, it's not gonna be all right. If it's not all right already, it's not going to be all right, because everything is happening in the now. And so what you want to remember is all the things that came from the people who are here. See, this talk is being given by everybody here. Your consciousness is lending credence by your affirmation that what happens here is real. And so right now, you are making a difference. We're being filmed or streamed. I don't know what Jasmine's doing. It's beyond my technical expertise. I'm just grateful that she's doing it. And anybody who watches this is watching your consciousness in action, even though they don't see you on the film. You cannot not have an influence on society, on your life. It's not possible for you to show up and nothing happen that has anything to do with you. So all the stories you've been telling yourself that says, I don't have anything to do with that, that's not true. You have everything to do with that, because your consciousness makes a difference. What do you think about it? We've been talking about grace and gratitude the whole month, and I'll be honest, I don't remember all the different titles grace is. Some probably Surrender to Grace was in there somewhere, and we're doing grace as the armor, the saving grace was in there. All these things about grace, and I just got this. It's like, Martha, you keep talking about this thing, but can you give it a What's that line from the movie Philadelphia when Denzel says, explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old? Can you explain it like you're talking to a 6-year-old so that you can get at your own understanding? And I get it. I say, okay, well, there's a level where you just understand that grace is the harmony of the universe. Grace is the synchronicity of the universe. Now, in the old church, they say that grace is God's love, and bestowing upon the people who deserve it. But grace is not something that you have to work or earn to deserve, because the universe is not waiting for you to earn or deserve whatever it happens. You are, by nature, by the fact that you are here, an aspect, a part of, caught up in the activity of this thing called creation. And this thing called creation is universal to the point where there's everything that's happening anywhere is happening under the banner of this idea. God is all there is. There's one life, one mind, one power, one presence. This is grace in action. Now, if we're not aware of this happening, then we don't get to take conscious access to what grace is. But when we are aware of it, then we get to consciously participate in this thing called the perfection of the universe. And that's why it's important to remember, like we talked about earlier, that God is still on the throne, that God's always in charge. What did you say? I like what you said. How did you say it? In charge. I like that. In charge. See, that means I don't have to figure it out myself because it's not my show. I'm not in charge. Man, that's a tremendous relief because, we can take on so much stuff that we make our own. And, of course, in this philosophy, when we say that your consciousness makes a difference, it almost seems like that it's up to me to change everything, to fix everything, and it's overwhelming and it's not fair. But when you remember that, no, God's in charge and God is operating through you, in you, and as you, so that means that there's a power and a presence and activity in me that's acting through me, that's making a difference in the world. And if I can let go of my opinion about things and the way I think things should go, don't we all have an idea about the way things should go? Even though we don't know what we're talking about, we still have the idea. Even though we know that this is not true, we still have the idea. And some of them are just favorites, like the sunrise and the sunset. We already know that the sun's not coming up or the sun's going down, but there's a poetic activity in talking about the sunrise and the sunset, yes? And so we've all agreed that we're watching a sunrise and we're watching a sunset, but everybody in here's had enough science to know that that's not what's happening. The earth is rotating, and that's what's causing the illusion of a sunrise and a sunset, but we get to call it whatever we want and experience it whatever way we want to. That's the way consciousness works. When you recognize that God is all there is. And so let me just go back to this thing with grace is again, because grace is the the realization of the inclusive nature of the universe where everything is relational to something else. There's nothing that stands alone by itself. In the universe, there's no such thing as a singularity. And since there's no such thing as a singularity, everything is relationship with something else. And so I like to say that God is relationship. And we have to know that God is relationship because everything that quote unquote God made is in a relationship. So the very nature of relationship has to be at the core and the foundation of everything that exists. And when I recognize that relationship is at the foundation and the core, there's the strata, the substance of everything that exists, then I know that right where I am, whatever's going on, whatever the circumstances, there's a relationship with God. And that relationship tells me that God's in charge, not Nwata. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing to let go of. The inclusive nature of the universe is grace. Are you with me on this so far? So is it possible for you to not have grace then?
No.
If it's the inclusive nature in the universe, then let's just presume that you are in the universe, since I'm looking at you right here and you're looking at me, that we're part of this thing we call the universe. Then you cannot be separate from the grace of God. It's not something you earn. It's not a meritocracy. It's not something that you cannot deserve. It's not something that can be taken away from you. The very fact that you exist means that you are in the grace of God right here and right now. And in the old church, they talk about grace being the favor of God. And I love it because if grace is the favor of God, that means God's doing good stuff for me. Dr. Holmes describes it differently when he says the universe conspires to your good. Universe conspires for my good. Grace is the favors of God. Same thing. Are you with me? That's the translation. Which means that wherever I walk, I'm not walking alone because I'm remembering that God is still on the throne. So this activity of grace is simply, when we talk about today, we're talking about putting on the armor of grace. That seems like, it almost seems antithetic. Why do you need armor? We need armor because we are so steeped in duality that we have a dogged determination to not release the idea that there can be something separate from God, something separate from me, and because it's separate from me, therefore it's an other beyond me, and that xenophobic idea of what we are and who we are comes into play, and we actually believe that there's something out there that can harm us. I'm remembering, whenever I talk about it, it goes back to Julia Butterfly Hill. I saw her speak one day. That's the woman who spent, 2 years in the redwood tree? Talk about a consciousness that makes a difference. She said, oh no, you're not cutting this tree down. Not on my watch. Oh, heck no. And you know she probably used stronger language than that. She climbed up to that tree and she made herself a house there and she stayed in the tree for 2 years. What's the line from, oh my God, I'm just getting images flooding my mind here, from Lord of the Rings. Remember when they're going underneath that mountain and the demon comes up, whatever it is, and
you shall not pass.
You shall not pass. Absolutely. We all saw that, right? And that idea that you shall not pass took him down. What was his name? See, we're not young enough to remember his name. I'm not talking about because we can't remember, but I'm just saying because, we're not buying into it at that level. Oh, it was right there. You shall not pass. The idea of lack, the idea of limitation, the idea of duality, the idea of the other, the idea that something can harm me shall not pass my consciousness unchecked by the truth that God is all there is. And whenever I check it with the truth that God is all there is, even though it might seem like, and if we remember correctly, that thing came as it was falling down and it grabs, I keep wanting to say Gandalf, but I don't think that's it. And he falls and it just looks, oh man, he's dead, he's gone. That thing took him out. But when you see him again, and I have some issues with him going from Gandalf the gray to the white. I have some challenges about that, but I was ready to let it go because I realized that's immaterial. That's a dualistic idea that's got me trapped in a loop that says somebody says that I'm separate from the whole, I'm separate from the one, and I'm letting the lie that they're telling about me affect my consciousness because I feel like I have to fight against the things that other people are saying about me. People, you don't have to fight against what somebody's saying about you. You have to guard against what you're saying about you. I have to guard against what I'm saying about me, what I've accepted as the truth of who and what I am. Are you with me on this so far? And so, the whole thing, if you set up, the whole setup was, well, I'm not going to go deeper into that one right there, but just, sometimes it looks like you're losing. But if you can remember that God's on the throne, that I'm not in charge, that there's an activity of wholeness, there's an inclusive nature of the universe that I'm a part of, then we can let go of our opinion, our idea that something outside of who and what we are is happening. Yes? Okay. I'm loving this. And I'm coming back to the law of polarity because we say there's balance, there's order, the polaric nature. I don't believe that's a word. There's polarity, meaning, what's that?
Sounds good.
It sounds good. If everybody knows what you're talking about, it's now a new word. And so the idea that there's polarity in the universe, that there's a yin and a yang, there's a in and an out, there's a positive and a quote negative as far as electricity goes, that there's a balance, that there's two opposing things that work together to make what is real real. Are you with me on this so far? Thank you so much, because duality is this concept out of balance. Duality means I'm beginning to think that there's not enough God to go around, that there's not enough good to go around, that there's not enough grace to go around, and it looks like, somebody put a hole in my bucket, and my good, my grace, my love of God, my wholeness is running out. And so now I have to protect myself. I have to guard against the idea that somebody can take something away from me. And in that idea of protecting myself from the idea that somebody can take something away from me, I open myself to the idea that somebody can take something away from me at a core level. And what begins to happen is because what we put our attention on tends to proliferate in our consciousness, because I'm putting my attention on the idea that somebody can do something bad to me, that can harm me. Everywhere I look, I can see people doing bad stuff. If not to me, they're doing it to somebody else, and I become a damage collector, and I'm just thinking to myself, oh God, ain't it awful? Oh God, ain't it awful? Oh God, ain't there's people who make careers off talking about how awful things are. They got, the people on the radio, they just say, you know what, it's awful, it's terrible, you should be afraid, you should be very afraid, you should be angry, you should be very angry. And it hits that primal nature where we feel separation and amplifies it to a degree that it takes over. It can take over just like the presence of the divine can take over. What are we focusing our attention on? The armor of God is the recognition that right where I am and just as I am, God is still on the throne. that I am one with the whole, one with the idea that there's nothing separate from the idea of God. And I want to go back to this self-giving nature as what grace is, because the givingness of the universe is giving the up, the down, the in, the out. The polarity is consistent, yes? So since the polarity is consistent, that polarity is going to be everywhere. But when we begin to think that there's an absence of one thing or the other, we become out of sync, out of phase. Duality is basically being out of focus or out of phase with the truth that's present. And so what we want to
Embrace.
that's good, thank you. Embrace. Let's go with that. He says the Spirit spoken. You don't know everything, but what? So what we want to embrace is something I heard Neil Donald Walsh say one time at a conference about the law of polarity. And what he said was, I just thought was brilliant. I jumped up and started screaming and clapping. He said, wait a minute, I want that at the end, son. I want that at the end. He says, I'll pay you later. Come by my office. But he said, when that which isn't, are you with me so far on that? When that which is not, then that which isn't either. Then that which is not either. Because it takes what isn't and what is to make what. You understand what I'm saying? If I decide there's going to be no shadow, well, then there can't be any light. If I decide there's not going to be any light, then there's going to be no shadow. These things work in relationship one with one another. And so when we have an imbalance of the idea that there's something missing, and we focus on what's missing, then we don't get to include everything that is. And so because we're not including everything that is, we don't have the full experience of what's happening at the moment. And in order to know what's happening at the moment, I have to be willing to stand in a place where the good and the bad can operate freely in my life, freely across the stage of my mind. And I'm not trying to make it be one thing or the other. I'm observing it, realizing that there's a greater power, a greater realization that's at work here. And that greater power, that greater realization is the self-givingness of the universe giving itself to me and through me and as me. And I'm quite taken by the idea of the universe giving itself to me, through me, and as me. The realization that I can't ever be by myself because God is still on the throne. There's a wholeness and a synergy of activity in the universe, and I am it. People, life is not a spectator sport. It requires your participation, but the participation itself makes it look like we're being a spectator, because the participation is to be actively engaged in the realization that God is expressing here and not allowing my opinion about what should happen influence what is happening in my mind. And if I'm moved, if I'm led, if I'm directed to do something, and this is critical, people, if I'm moved, if I'm led, if I'm directed to do something, what did I say? If I'm
Moved, if I'm led, if I'm directed.
Yes, if I'm moved, if I'm led, and if I'm directed. Do you know what I mean when I say that? We all know about that feeling we get in the pit of our stomach, or sometimes we hear the little voice say something, we get an impulse to do something. We want to cultivate our relationship with that intuitive nature, because quite frankly, it's the instinctive nature of the human being that's tied in beyond our recognition of it. That's dialed completely into the universe. It's there. It cannot be squashed, diminished, or destroyed. It's there. And so, but because we've leaned so heavily, and this is why the scripture says, trust in the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy mind and all thy soul, and lean not to your own understanding. Lean not to your own understanding, because my understanding and your understanding is often influenced by what we call facts. And we let facts masquerade as truth. And when we let facts masquerade as truth, then we fall victim to what the facts are. And if the facts say there's a limitation in me, if the facts say there's something against me, if the fact says I need to be afraid, then I allow that to be my truth, and I step out of my spiritual integrity and power and now become a victim, participating in a dance that is not serving me. Am I? Are we together on this so far? Okay, just this idea about grace being the self-givingness of the universe, the realization that God is conspiring for my good, that everything, all creation stories talk about how everything the human being needed was already here when the human being was created, which is the idea that Einstein asked the question, is the universe friendly? And said, how you answer that question is how you're going to live your life. Well, I've been on the other side of it being a hostile universe, and it wasn't fun for me. It wasn't fun at all. I thought I was having fun a lot of the time, but in retrospect, everything I was doing was taking me further and further away from the realization of who and what I was, and it took a moment of clarity, as they say in the rules. It took a moment of clarity for me to hear the idea that there's something divine about Muata. People, there's something divine about you right where you are and just as you are, and there's nothing you have to do to make it happen. It's already happening. And what we get to do is remember who we are. In the 11 laws of God, it says that you are born from a peace that is so deep that nothing can disturb it. My God. You mean there's something in me, through me, and as me that's so deep it cannot be disturbed? Well, then that's the place I need to be checking on a regular basis, because sometimes I'm allowing myself to be disturbed by things that don't matter at all. Say, well, Muat, you say it doesn't matter, but you know, people are living and people are dying and this happening to people, that thing. Yes, there's all kinds of things going on in the universe, and guess what? It's always been this way. It will continue to be this way. There's a yin and a yang. What's the song? Who is that? Was that Blood, Sweat, and Tears said? And when I'm dead and when I'm gone, there'll be one more child born to carry on. There's something that's a continuity of life. Everything that's being created is being created with the destruction of something else, but it's all part of the same creation. When the jack pine opens its cone to release its seed, it requires a fire so hot that it burns down the forest, and only then does it participate and give of itself. And so what you want to realize is sometimes in your life, you might be stuck in a place that you don't know who you are, and you can't understand the truth, and you've signed up for some abuse in some form or another, but it's only happening because you have decided you need a fire so hot that it burns down the walls, it burns down the barriers, it burns down the idea that there can be something from God, and you can finally let go. And by letting go, that means I get to focus on something different than what I've been focusing on. And so we always want to focus on the wholeness of God, the oneness of God. There's a story, usually comes out around Thanksgiving, about this king that used to like to go hunting. Used to like to go, wow. Oh, and he had a servant he'd bring with him. The servant had an expression called, oh, what a blessing. And no matter what would happen, the servant would say, oh, what a blessing. Sometimes it got on the king's nerves, but he liked the guy's companionship. And one day, they were out hunting, and the servant accidentally injures the king. And he says, oh, what a blessing. And the king wasn't happy about it. Oh, you think it's a blessing that you injured me? Is that what you're saying? He says, oh, what a blessing. So the king gets mad, and he throws the man in jail. And he leaves him there, and the next time he goes hunting, he strays a little too far because he doesn't have his guide with him, and an enemy camp, an other, captures him, and they decide they were going to kill him and possibly eat him. And so he's fearing for his life here. He doesn't know what to do, what's going on. He doesn't know how to get out of this. And it turns out he has an abnormal growth on his hand. It's not a normal hand. And so when the enemy camp sees that abnormal hand, they backed off because in their faith, that was taboo. You can't mess with people who have that. And so they let him go. And so he runs back home, and he's happy, and he calls his servant up and tells him the story. He said, man, and they were going to eat me. And, you know, and the servant says, oh, what a blessing. He says, what the heck? You keep saying, oh, what a blessing. Why are you saying, oh, what a blessing now? He said, he said, I'm sorry I threw you in jail. That's why I'm sorry I put you in jail. And the guy says, oh, what a blessing. He says, you think it was a blessing that you were in jail? He said, yeah. He says, why? Because if I'd have been with you, they'd have eaten me. So we learn to just let life be life. And what happens is we stop keeping score. Because keeping score is an activity of lack and limitation. Keeping score means I think there's not enough to go around, and I have to get mine while the getting is good and make sure nobody can get it away from me. But people, life just is. And you get to determine the relationship you're having with life. And when you can have an inclusive idea of what the universe is, that includes all activity and all circumstance and all situation, then there's nothing for you to fight against, because you realize it's all part of the same experience. This is the most powerful thought a person can have, the realization that everything is connected. Oh my God. I watch too much TV sometimes. There's this show on called Dirk Gently, the Holistic Detective. And if you haven't seen it, there's a consistent theme in it where he says, everything is connected. Everything is connected. Everything, people, everything is connected. Everything's connected because there's only one thing. It's not connected. It's in relationship with itself. It's unfolding of itself. And you are an activity of that relationship. And so when you realize that I'm an activity of that thing, it's like I might be a cell in the elbow, but that doesn't mean the cell in the knee is my enemy. It means that we're all participating for a greater activity of something magnificent to happen. It reminds me of the story in Rumi where there's a poem called The Chickpea. Are you familiar with the poem called The Chickpea? Well, there's a pot brewing on the stove, and the chickpea jumps out, and the cook smashes him back down with the ladle. Says, "Get back in there. You're not ready yet." And he says, "Do you remember all that rain you soaked up in the garden? That was for this." Stay in the pot. Stay in the pot. People, it's what somebody called it, my teacher Margaret called it the cauldron of divine discontent. We don't know what's cooking. We can't smell what the rock is cooking, but there's a brew. There's something happening that when we allow ourselves to stay steeped in that heat long enough, we release the essence of who we are out into the universe, and we ourselves are now the blessing. And people will see the light of truth so strong and so bright in you that they will be able to tell that you're making a difference even before you are. And they'll wonder, what are you doing? What's up with you? How do you do what you're doing? How do you remain so calm? And now you are the ambassador of that same peace that was already within them. And what you've done is allowed them to access a place so deep within them that they are no longer being disturbed. And when you touch that space, and when you allow somebody else to touch that space, there's a synergy, there's a wholeness, there's a quickening that happens. And it's transformative. That's the grace I'm talking about. That's the grace that you are. That's the power that rests and abides in you wherever you are, whatever you do, whatever the circumstance is. And so today, like every day, just take a moment. They talk about taking a moment to smell the roses. Take a moment to just observe nature and begin to give thanks. Giving thanks is another way to access the grace, because giving thanks is an opening process where we accept the fact that we've already received something. And if I'm in the state of being receptive, I can now be receptive to the truth of who I am. And so giving thanks is a powerful activity to gird us deeper into the understanding that God is all there is, and I'm one with God. And because that's true, I have something to be grateful for. I'm grateful for the realization that God is still on the throne. I'm grateful for the understanding that the universe has my back. I'm grateful for the understanding